Hello there, and welcome to another of the Spink Medal Department pre-auction podcasts. This time for the auction on the 29th of July here in London, and we're pleased to say that restrictions have been lifted here in the United Kingdom, so we are pleased to welcome anybody who wishes to bid live in the room here back to our recently refurbished gallery. There will obviously be viewing on the 28th, the Wednesday, for anybody who'd like to come along. And if you can't make it on Wednesday, please just give us a ring and we can either fix up for a private viewing or provide you with extra photographs, of course. So you'll forgive my my attire. It's a bit of a heat wave here in London. So we've taken off the jacket and we will take you on a rip-roaring trip through the sale of around 500 lots. Again, a vast offering. A good selection of Victorian and later campaign medals, interesting selection of groups, including some good ones to Gurkhas and to the Nepal Regiment, and as ever, the gallantry offering strong, and the foreign and the miniatures section also burgeoning with interesting produce for you all to bid live and via Spink Live before the auction. Following on from the success of the e-auction on the 1st of July, which was 99.5% sold, the market again is in a very strong position, and we're also pleased to present you with our first catalogue for a little while, now that the postage systems are up and running again. And I'm thrilled to start this auction podcast with the front cover lot. That's lot 263. Just down here in front of me, and I'll show you very quickly. That is the superb CB V.C group of 3 awarded to General James Blair of the 2nd Bombay Light Cavalry. Blair was born out in India, the son of a fellow member of the Indian Army, and he won his quite remarkable Victoria Cross in the heat of action in Nimuch, and the actions around Nimuch in the late period of 1857, right at the beginning of the Indian Mutiny. And his unit, the 2nd Bombay Light Cavalry, actually were sent to Nimuch, the place of his birth, after it had seen the overthrow of the local forces there who had abandoned the city. It actually was the furthest south in India that the mutiny spread, and it was thick with action. His Victoria Cross was actually one of the final Victoria Crosses awarded for the mutiny in terms of date. It was awarded in 1862, and at the time was the 150th Victoria Cross presented in the London Gazette. His was won for 2 separate actions. The first, which occurred on the 12th of August 1857, when the gallant Blair volunteered to charge a house which had been blockaded by a group of mutineers. As you'd expect of a gallant young officer, he was straight in there in the thick of the action, clearing this house, was severely wounded in the action, and saw them off into the night. And so the first piece of action which pushed him towards being awarded the ultimate gallantry award. The second action was perhaps more heart-racing. It's one which has been quoted in the press. This group has been featured over the weekend and today in 5 or 6 national newspapers here in the UK. And that was the action on the 23rd of October at Jerum. So having recovered from his wounds, he was again in the thick of the action, and at one point was totally encircled by mutineers. Blair, with no thought for his own safety, he cut his way back through a huge portion of enemy, and in the process, swinging his blade through the head of a mutineer, had the tip and the actual blade of his sword broken. But the action scattered the enemy and it enabled him to rejoin his unit. Nonetheless, when he'd rejoined them, there was the need to form up and again charge the enemy. Blair, he came to the fore, and with his the blunt hilt of his sword snapped in the previous action, he was the man who gathered them together, led the charge. He again was severely wounded with a large slash through his arm, and it's no surprise he was awarded the Victoria Cross. He later participated in the rather well documented actions of the 2nd Bombay Light Cavalry, pursuing the mutineers and their generals, and he was presented with his V.C. in Bombay a little bit later, and the CB on the front of his group, which was awarded in 1889, was actually given shortly after he had completed his tour as the Governor of Aden, which he completed from 1882 to 1885. Again, a really interesting period that you can read about in the print catalogue or online. And in that period, obviously, Aden is at the centre of some really interesting evolving events in and around the Persian Gulf. And Blair is the man. He's in there, he's making tough decisions, and he's ensuring all of the British interests are being looked after, but also those from other countries, the French and also other African countries who want an interest in that area, are being governed properly. It's rather a lovely story. This Victoria Cross was last seen at Spink in 1969, and went off to the west coast of America to a collector, and is now coming back to Spink some 50 years later. So this is a lovely group, mounted as worn in all the photographs you see of the general. He is wearing them exactly as you see them. They come in a lovely glazed wooden and leather frame, and they carry a pre-sale estimate of £160,000 to £200,000. The current market for the Victoria Cross is obviously extremely strong. Prices, both at auction and especially by private treaty, have been hotting up, and there have been a number of new buyers showing interest in this field. So again, we hope for a good result on the day, and they will be sold as lot 263. So we've covered the Army. Why not I move on to the Navy, and the Wavy Navy, this group I'll talk about. We have the pleasure to offer some 50 lots on behalf of the family of the late Peter Kirk, a long-time friend and client of Spink. Peter served in MTBs and was chief gunner of MTB 350 during the last war, and obviously with his penchant for all things coastal forces and his own experiences as a very well-respected member of the Coastal Forces Association, Peter's family have put the final gems of his collection up for sale with Spink, and in this auction we will be offering a special selection which include a number of gallantry awards to the Coastal Forces, namely a D.S.C and bar, a D.S.C which I'll mention in a second, and 2 absolutely superb DSMs awarded for Coastal Forces actions, both in home waters and in the Mediterranean. Beyond that, there's also a number of DSMs besides some really interesting campaign groups to the Royal Navy, and with this lovely provenance, it should offer something for every collector with an interest in the Navy over the last 150, 200 years. So the group I'd like to talk to you about will be sold as lot 206. These are the D.S.C group awarded to Lieutenant Commander Buller of the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve. Buller was a gallant MTB commander, and he commanded MTB 666, all the sixes. He participated, as you'll read about in the catalogue, in a number of really fascinating long-range coastal forces actions up to Norway. In December 43, he was involved in a number of drops of radios and agents to assist the Norwegian resistance, and later on his boat was laid up under camouflage nets for 24 hours in the fjords of Norway, which then enabled his men to land and meet up with the Norwegian resistance. And 2 of the things which came back as their booty were a couple of Christmas trees which were sent down from Lerwick, and one was destined for Winston Churchill and the other for Princesses Elizabeth and Margaret. So Buller, in the thick of the action, It's a fantastic theatre of war, and extremely well documented award. It's got all of his RMVR flimsies, lots of reports, passports, all that sort of material. You can read about the full archive in the catalogue. His D.S.C was won in June 44 off Egmont, and it was an action which cost the enemy no less than four vessels sunk. Let's not say it wasn't a cakewalk. His boat had a number of men killed, a number of the coastal forces units and boats that were present lost boats too, but it was a massively successful operation. And Buller also was unfortunate enough to be sunk on the night of the 4th, 5th of July. He was captured and sent off to Germany, and was then a member of one of the forced marches. So he went through everything that one might expect of an officer taken prisoner in the Second World War in Europe. So a fantastic group. And when was the last time that a D.S.C to an MTB commander came on the market? You will answer that question for me, but the pre-sale estimate of 28 to 3,200 should well be exceeded. Cracking group, superb provenance, lovely paperwork. What more could you want? So the Army, I've given you a little preview. The Navy, again, go and have a look. We've got a number of lovely items. Got a rather cracking CB CMG group to Lieutenant Commander Dick, which is most interesting group, Scottish connections. And finally, the back cover lot. We go to the Royal Air Force, and this group here is that of Wing Commander Tubby Baker, lot 247, and that is the Wing Commander's immediate D.S.O, immediate bar, immediate D.F.C, immediate bar. Tubby Baker was a character of huge proportions in every dimension, a huge drinker, a huge smoker, and a huge eater from all the photographs that you can see of him. Tubby has a unique record of service in the Second World War. He flew 100 missions, that's 4 operational tours of duty. All of those were carried out on heavy bombers, and all of those ops were carried out over the most heavily defended targets in Europe. There are 3 other gentlemen who served 100 missions as a heavy bomber pilot. None of them completed all of those sorties over the most heavily defended parts of Europe. There are a number of those who took part in missions over Africa and the Middle East. So Tubby's record is unsurpassed. He then passed as a member of the Pathfinder Force and completed the last 20 of his missions as Master Bomber. Baker participated in the legendary Peenemünde raid, and his flying tactics are recalled in Middlebrook's book on Peenemünde, which again you can read about, and the full quote is there in the catalogue entry, which runs to 10 pages. And one of my favourite actions is the Boxing Day 1944 action, daylight raid on St Vit by 294 Lancaster bombers, led by Tubby Baker on St Vit. And this is at the heat and the height of the Battle of the Bulge. An armoured concentration of the 6th SS Panzer Division was building up at St Vit. It needed an accurate, deadly and massive daylight raid to break it up and stop any breakthrough that was going to happen in that pocket. Baker was your man. He led that raid. He smashed the enemy. And I've just got a couple of items here I'd like to show you. This, his trusty silver tankard presented by the officers on the completion of his 100th sortie, flying with obviously 635 Squadron from Downham Market. A lovely token. Also an engraved silver cigarette case is included with the lot. you can see the photograph which features on the back cover. That is Tubby stepping down for the 100th time, being presented with a pint, and being the good chap he was, it went down in one. Besides that, you've got his experimental bombsight D. Again, this is an extremely rare piece of aeronautical history. There are just believed to be 3 or 4 of these in existence, and the other, a number of these known are supposedly in museums in this country. So again, a rare opportunity to acquire a piece of kit that actually flew with Tubby. Besides that, you've obviously got the full set of his logbooks. So it is a totally complete group. He has an unsurpassed record of flying, and when he died just over 10 years ago, he was given a worthy write-up in the Daily Telegraph, and it's just a cracking group. You'll struggle to find a better group to a Second World War airman, simple as that. Pre-sale estimate 28 to 32,000. Let's see where we go. It is absolutely superb, and even if you're not an RAF collector or a flying collector, I would give that one a read. It really is extremely special. So we've covered the 3 forces. I should also say there is a very interesting and very, very varied selection of flying material on offer in this auction. We go right the way from the Royal Flying Corps. We've got an MM to both the RAF and the Royal Flying Corps for the Great War. We have an AFC groups for the Great War, AFC groups Second War, AFMs as well, post-war. Extremely rare flying awards on offer in this sale on the 29th. So again, a rare opportunity to acquire some really interesting, extremely well documented and extremely well illustrated groups to add to all of your collections. So do go and have a look at those. All of those well worth a read. Lots of stories of daring do and lots of humour in amongst all of that. So once you've had those sections, obviously we move on to the miniatures. Again, good run of miniature groups, often attributed to the full-size awards previously sold. There's some nice little run of world miniature orders, decorations and medals, including rather rare Chinese postal merit decoration. And then the foreign orders, decorations and medals, also a lovely offering from around the world. I'll just show you a couple of my favourites. One of my favourites is this cracking Imperial Russian second-class Order of the Medal of St. George for bravery, awarded to Corporal Ward of the Royal Field Artillery, officially numbered 2887 to the reverse. And again, a good solid piece, come out of a Sleepy collection down in Hampshire. And I had a quick look before coming to film this, and the pre-sale estimate of 12 to 1500 has already been well surpassed. We're at 3,200 on Spink Live. So it'd be interesting to see where Corporal Ward's Russian Medal of St. George goes. That's being sold as lot 475. And the final lot I'd like to talk to you about today is lot 416. This is the, again, Grand Cross sash badge of the Legion of Honour, the July Monarchy type, in gold and enamels, as you can see there. This is rather special because this is the Grand Cross badge worn by Carl XIV, King of Sweden and Norway, crowned in 1818 till his death. And this badge comes in a lovely glazed wooden box with a cracking inscription in silver on the end stating the provenance of it, and was gifted to a Count von Rosen. And it's come out of a distinguished collection in North America, which we have been handling over the last couple of years, which has also produced a number of record prices. So the provenance is solid. These July Monarchy badges are often seen to members of royal families who had obviously had the first type Legion of Honour. Carl XIV, obviously the first of the Bernadotte dynasty, And again, it's a lovely one-off piece and just the sort of thing we love handling here at Spink. And that carries a pre-sale estimate of just £2,000 to £3,000. So again, well worth the bid. Do go and have a look on Spink Live, extra photographs, and it's as ever, it's been a real pleasure putting this sale together for the three of us, and no doubt I hope you will enjoy the catalogue just as much as we have, and I'm sure you will no doubt enjoy hearing a few more stories from Harry and Robert. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Marcus. My first topic of discussion today will be the medal group of Major General John Hannington, lot 216 in the upcoming sale. Hannington was born in Tellicherry, India, the son of an Anglo-Irish judge in the Indian Civil Service. He was educated at the United Services College in Devon, and then spent 2 years in the Royal Dublin Fusiliers in their reserve battalion. He was commissioned into the Worcestershire Regiment in 1889 and promoted lieutenant in 1891. In 1892, having joined his regiment in India, he elected to transfer to the Indian Army. His first taste of action came in 1895 during the Mwele expedition, where he served as intelligence officer to the 24th Bombay Native Infantry. After a short rest in India, he returned to Africa, this time Uganda, with the 27th Baluch Light Infantry. This regiment was heavily involved in the Tieta Hills expedition, and later on was involved in the mopping up of the Sudanese mutineers who had been active in the country earlier that decade. Hannington was deeply involved in this part of the operation and was severely injured in 1898, leading a party of 30 sepoys through mutineer-held territory. Their company was unfortunately ambushed, and he suffered a severe injury to his left hand and shoulder. Falling back on their fort with just half his men alive, he and the rest of his company were able to exact revenge on the mutineers, who had grown overconfident at that point. Leaving Uganda in 1899, he was promoted captain. He returned to Africa, however, in 1901, serving in Somaliland as commander of a camel company. Promoted major in 1907, he was considered high enough in the esteem of his brother officers that when his commanding officer, Colonel Gao V.C, fell ill, he took over command with the rank of temporary lieutenant colonel, this being of the 3rd Battalion King's African Rifles. During this time, the British government was withdrawing forces from the interior of Somaliland to the coast, and he was heavily involved in that operation, which won him the CMG in the 1911 New Year's Honours. With the outbreak of the First World War, he was again with a new unit, this time the 129th Duke of Connaught's own Baluchis. At this point in India, although very swiftly transferred to the Lahore Division and sent to France, landing at Marseille in September. By October 1914, they were thrown into the battle at Ypres, and it was the 129th who were the first unit of the Indian Army to engage in Flanders. It was also during this engagement that the first Indian V.C. was won. Hannington, being second in command of the regiment at the time, was heavily involved in that action. Soon promoted colonel of the regiment and given command of it, it was in 1916 that he led them to East Africa, where they would spend the rest of the war. After some early fighting in the vicinity of the Pare Mountains, Hannington was promoted temporary brigadier general, a rank he was to hold for the rest of the conflict, and given command of a brigade, this point 2nd Brigade. Again in action around the Pare Mountains, they were able very quickly to clear the German forces out of that region and begin a drive south, which didn't end until the fall of Dar es Salaam. In 1917, Hannington was the commander of a force of 2,000 rifles sent to Kilwa on the southern coast, which then pushed north towards Kitaba. It was during this period that he was briefly Major General, although returning to the rank of Brigadier General in February 1917. Unfortunately, the climate and the heavy fighting caused a severe strain on Brigadier General, and he soon became ill. Recovering in time for the big push in late 1917, he was in on the action when von Lettow-Vorbeck, despite his masterly guerrilla campaign, was finally pushed into Portuguese Mozambique. At this point it was decided that the bulk of the fighting was to be shouldered by African troops rather than the Indian army, and these soldiers were slowly withdrawn from the conflict. Hannington himself not leaving until August 1918. By this point, unfortunately, he had become gravely ill, and he died en route to India in 1918. He is buried at the Ishmalia War Cemetery. This lot is valued at £6,000 to £8,000. The next item is a rather unique object, the Barrington Kennett Medal awarded to Squadron Leader Charles Rose. Born in 1915, Rose was accepted as an apprentice at Halton in 1931, where he became part of No. 2 Wing. It is, however, on behalf of No. 1 Wing that he won this medal in 1932. With the outbreak of war, he was appointed Sergeant Pilot with 248 Squadron, winning his D.F.M. in 1940, the same year, and a mention in January of 1941. That same year he was commissioned a pilot officer, and the next year, 1943, he went on to win his D.F.M. On 4th of November 1943, Rose was part of a patrol sent out over the Bay of Biscay, flying Mosquitoes. Passing over the western side of France, the patrol spotted a civilian trawler, which appeared to be suspiciously not involved in any civilian activities. A closer look convinced Rose that the trawler was in fact a lookout for a U-boat nearby. He dived into the attack and was met with ground fire. His attack run was successful, damaging the trawler significantly. Unfortunately, he himself was killed by the ground fire along with his co-pilot when their aircraft crashed into the sea. He is remembered on the Runnymede Memorial. This lot 310, is valued at £80 to £100. The last lot I have to show you today, lot 76, is a almost unique pair awarded to Mr. Howard Hensman of the Pioneer newspaper for the Afghan campaign, and specifically the Kabul to Kandahar march. Hensman was involved in the second half of the campaign after the Kabul massacre. A great favourite of the figures in India at the time, Hensman was known to have worked with Rudyard Kipling and was a good friend to Sir Ian Hamilton, Churchill's mentor. During the Battle of Carissa, Hensman offered his services to General Roberts, which were accepted, hence his involvement in the battle. He was involved then in every battle which Roberts took part in, helping during the advance to Sherpur, where he was present, if not actively engaged, in the charge at Kilikaza, and certainly for the siege of the cantonment at Sherpur afterwards. Hensman was also present with the arrival of the news of the disastrous battle at Mayawand, crushing everyone's hopes for an early victory. Roberts then had to march nearly 300 miles over rough country to the relief of the Kandahar garrison. This he did in only 15 days, with a column of 18,000 men and camp followers, and 6,000 to 7,000 animals, and a feat of marching, Hensman says, may well have been unrivalled. Present for the Battle of Kandahar and the end of the campaign, only Luther Vaughan of the Times can claim to have been taken part in the march and to have seen the battle. This is, again, an almost unique pair, and it is available in the auction for £2,000 to £2,400. Thank you very much, and I will now pass you on to Robert.
So, with thanks to Marcus and Harry, as is traditional form in these medal videos, I am going to round off our little display for today and take you through a few of my favourite lots and tell you a little bit more about the sale. Now, before we go any further, I'm obviously very pleased, or indeed we're all very pleased, to of course tell you we have a proper catalogue for this sale, and it's our first proper catalogue in some time, and here it is, and I hope you'll agree it's a very fine thing indeed, and featuring of course the fantastic Victoria Cross group on the front cover, which Marcus has already covered. So just a quick note that we do have a proper catalogue. They should be winging their way to you in the post, and if they aren't, please let us know and we will be sure to send you one. So yes, a fantastic catalogue, and it's nice to be returning to actually seeing the fruits of our labours in print. So, with the catalogue covered, I therefore am going to move on to some of my favourite lots from this sale. And I'm going to start with none other than actually Lot 1, this rather fantastic Bolton's medal for the Battle of Trafalgar. And this is a particularly fine example because, as you will see, it is mounted in a very fine silver case with these glazed lunettes, which for those interested in Napoleonic medals will know was quite a popular thing at the time for those who wanted to do something a little bit special to preserve their medal for posterity. And this one happily is attributed, and the naming along the edge reads John Macaulay, First Lieutenant. Now, John Macaulay was, as I've just said, First Lieutenant, and he was First Lieutenant of HMS Spartiate at the Battle of Trafalgar. But Macaulay was a really fascinating character because he'd seen a lot of action during the Napoleonic Wars up to this point, and indeed long afterwards. This medal, as with a number of others, one of which I will cover in a moment, came to us from the auctioneer's dream, the unexplored collection, a small collection of older medals that haven't seen the light of day in a number of years. So this hasn't been on the market for a considerable time, which of course is exactly what you want as a collector and indeed as an auctioneer, because it always lends sort of quite an exciting atmosphere to what you will discover. And indeed, Macaulay, we discovered lots of interesting things about him. The most interesting, probably, fact about Macaulay is that he was a disciple of none other than Sir Edward Pellew. If you have an interest in the Napoleonic Wars, you may know that Sir Edward Pellew was made famous by C.S. Forester in his novels about Horatio Hornblower, and Hornblower found himself with Pellew on many of his early adventures on the HMS Indefatigable. And indeed, it's really quite fun to say that Macaulay was one of those midshipmen or one of those junior officers on the Indefatigable with Pellew for some of those early actions that C.S. Forester wrote about in his novels. The most famous of which, of course, was Pellew's action against the French 74-gun ship, the Droit de l'Homme, on an action off the coast of Ireland in 1797, when two frigates, the Indefatigable being one of them, essentially were very successful in defeating a French ship of the line, which is no mean feat for even two frigates to come up against and defeat a French ship of significantly greater guns and heavier firepower. Of course, the French advantage in weight of shot and number of guns was somewhat negated by the heavy seas being shipped at the time, which meant that the French couldn't open their lower deck gun ports. So it was a somewhat fairer fight for the British frigates. Nevertheless, it was a difficult battle really for the British to win, because you're still fighting against a far heavier enemy ship. And indeed, the greater numbers of men on board the French ship meant that you didn't want to get too close because you'd run the risk of a boarding action, and in that, weight of numbers would surely tell in French favour. So a running fight developed, which ended in a British victory, and the Droit de l'Homme was wrecked, but unfortunately it was during this action that the young Macaulay was hit, one of the very few officer casualties actually during the battle, and ended up losing an arm. But this didn't prevent him from getting fully involved in further actions, much like, of course, the great Admiral Nelson, who famously disabled with the loss of an arm, and indeed the loss of an eye. And Macaulay went on to have a very distinguished naval career, and ended up commanding various independent ships on his own and doing lots of interesting things. And I quote a very interesting and amusing passage from our catalogue. During an action off the coast of France, during the Quiberon Bay expedition, again written about by C.S. Forester, who has the young Horatio Hornblower taking part, in which apparently Macaulay went up to Sir Edward Pellew and requested that he be involved in the shore operations, the boats to row ashore to essentially blow up French shore batteries and create havoc and all that sort of thing. And the Royal Naval Biography records that Macaulay went up to Sir Edward, interrupted him in a conversation with Major General Maitland, and asking what part he was to act in the event of the debarkation taking place. The answer was, "Macaulay, you have lost one hand already, and if you lose the other, you will not have anything to wipe your backside with. You will remain on board with the First Lieutenant to fight the ship as she is to engage an 8-gun battery." I think that's a really fantastic bit of recorded dialogue there with one of the most famous frigate captains of the age, and it makes Macaulay's medal come alive. So Macaulay was First Lieutenant on the HMS Spartiate at Trafalgar, and the interesting thing about Spartiate was that her ensign, her flag, survived and later went up for auction, and in fact sold on Trafalgar Day for the astonishing figure of £384,000. And it was very much talked about in the news, in the press at the time. You can look up the stories, and so again a wonderful connection there with this medal. Macaulay went on to, again, as I said, have a distinguished career, and was made post, which of course meant that as one progressed, if you got to captain as you progressed in age, so in seniority. So he ended up as a rear admiral. He also survived just long enough to claim his Naval General Service Medal with 3 clasps. He died a year later in 1848, but his 3-clasp entitlement is a unique combination, and if his medal is out there somewhere, it would be wonderful to reunite the Naval General Service Medal with his attributed Matthew Boulton's Trafalgar Medal. So if you have that in your collection, you would absolutely want to have his Trafalgar Medal to go with it. It is lot 1, as I said, of the sale, and carries, I think, a very conservative pre-auction estimate of £1,800 to £2,200. Let's see how it does when we open up on the day, but I hope it'll do very much better. Staying with the theme of naval medals, next up is a Naval General Service Medal. It has 1 clasp for the Nile, and it is attributed to a chap called Henry Stroud, who was a drummer in the Royal Marines on HMS Bellerophon at the Battle of the Nile. Now, again, this came from the same collection as Macaulay's Boulton's Trafalgar Medal, and again is something that really stands out to me. The reason being that HMS Bellerophon really took a vital and very important part in the Battle of the Nile, and indeed the 74-gun Bellerophon was at one point ranged yardarm to yardarm against the French flagship L'Orient, which at 120 guns and with 3 decks rather than the Bellerophon's 2, significantly outgunned the British ship. As you might expect, the Bellerophon took a real pounding from the French, and as the accounts have it, unfortunately, took a very significant amount of damage and essentially became dismasted. There are, again, accounts, you can read about it in the catalogue, I wrote this medal up. There are accounts of the mainmast and the mizzenmast of the Bellerophon being shot away, and as all the officers of the Bellerophon became casualties, command developed on a young midshipman who essentially saw what was happening and decided to get the foremast, get sails on the foremast and get out of action to try and repair the damage before it became any worse. The sails were set, and unfortunately this proved too much of a strain for the foremast, which then fell by the board, as did the bowsprit, and the Bellerophon essentially drifted off into the night, somewhat disabled and out of action. And as I'm sure I mentioned in the catalogue, I'm sure there was some satisfaction when the Lorient blew up in the middle of the night in a terrific explosion, and that caused actually the battle to come to a standstill for 3 or 4 minutes. The shock waves essentially that were caused throughout both fleets stunned the survivors, and I think the crew on board the Bellerophon, there must have been some sense of grim satisfaction that this is what they had helped to achieve, and the French flagship was no more. So Henry Stroud, as a drummer of the Royal Marines, must have been very much in the thick of the fighting, relaying orders by the beat of his drum. He must have been in a pretty exposed position, and it's amazing that he survived, and indeed he did survive. So he went on to claim his Naval General Service Medal with 1 clasp for the Nile, and clearly lived on into at least 1847, 1848. This medal conjures up lots of very interesting themes and lots of interesting stories, and if you like collecting medals to those involved in the major engagements of the Napoleonic Wars, I think this is a pretty good one to go for. So Henry Stroud, drummer of the Royal Marines, it is lot 3 in the sale, again with a conservative estimate of £800 to £1,000, and I hope it's going to do very well. Again, it's come from a collection which hasn't seen the light of day in a very long time, in many, many decades. So again, a good one for collectors. It is, of course, worth bearing in mind that HMS Bellerophon herself went on to have a very distinguished career, and is also notable for being the ship that the Emperor Napoleon surrendered to after losing the Battle of Waterloo in June 1815. In July of 1815, he actually surrendered to the captain of HMS Bellerophon and was transported from the coast of France to the coast of Britain on board the Bellerophon. So one wonders if Henry Stroud actually saw the great Emperor Napoleon in the course of his career. So, moving on from the Navy now to the Army to round off my little collection of lots. And the next medal we have here is a very nice Hanoverian Waterloo medal, awarded to an officer. And the officer in question was Captain August von Reden. Now, von Reden had the distinction of commanding the Feldjäger Corps during the Waterloo campaign, both at the Battle of Quatre Bras, the subsequent retreat to Waterloo, and in fact at the Battle of Waterloo itself. And the nice thing about this is that von Reden, in command of the Feldjäger Corps, essentially defended the woods of the Chateau of Hougoumont in the opening moves of the Battle of Waterloo, and with his only a couple of hundred men, essentially opposed the French with several thousand men in the first assaults against the Allied position at Hougoumont. And those of you who have listened to previous examples of our filming may remember me talking about the Waterloo MGS pair to a sergeant in Bull's troop, the Royal Horse Artillery, who, armed with their 5.5-inch howitzers, provided plunging fire in support of the defence of Hougoumont. It is undoubtedly the case that von Reden would have seen the howitzer shells of Bull's troop, Royal Horse Artillery, going over his head to burst amongst the columns of French troops as they advanced. So it's a very emotive thing, and it gets better because von Reden was wounded by the French at one point during the defence of the woods, and it is recorded that 2 of his men came to his aid. And von Reden was wounded. These 2 riflemen saw what had happened, didn't want him to be captured by the French, made sure that he was pulled back to the Allied lines, and both of them received a Guelphic medal for doing so. And that's on record. You can read about it in the catalogue. And I think, again, it's a very emotive thing. So that was von Reden out of the fight, but he'd played a very important part in the opening moves of the Battle of Waterloo, defending the hedges, the woods, the orchard of the Chateau of Hougoumont. And also don't forget, as I said, he was involved in Quatre Bras 2 days previously. And so I think it's a great thing. This medal also formed part of Spink's own Waterloo exhibition in 2015 to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Waterloo. So it has some good modern provenance as well as some earlier provenance as well. And again, I think if you want a Waterloo medal to an officer who is recorded as being in the thick of the fighting, you're not really going to get much better than this. And I think for the price, it's a very good thing. This forms lot 431 and has an estimate of £2,000 to £3,000. Now, if you consider if this was a British Waterloo medal to a British officer with a similar fighting story, perhaps one of the Guards officers again fighting in the defence of Hougoumont, you'd be talking multiples of £2,000 to £3,000. So you'd be getting a bit of a bargain at this sort of price. So I think it's a fantastic thing, and do pay good attention to it if you want a wonderful example of a Waterloo medal to an officer in the Allied Army. Yeah, you're going to have to do quite well to find anything better than this. So the final lots I'm going to talk about are somewhat related, and they are these very fine Order of the Bath stall plates. Now, what was a stall plate? Well, a stall plate was an idea that came about certainly for the companionship of the Order of the Bath in 1815 upon the expansion of the Order. Up until that point, if you were created a knight of various orders, whether the Garter, the Thistle, St Patrick, the Bath of course, you were entitled to purchase a stall plate with your details engraved upon it, which could be then put up in Westminster Abbey to essentially tell the world that you had done some very good deeds, that you had been honoured by your king and your country, and they would be there for posterity for all to see. So when the Order of the Bath was expanded in 1815, this extended to companions of the Order. And here we have 2 stall plates for companions of the Order, a chap called George Mason and a chap called Robert Douglas, one a major in the Royal Artillery and another in the service of the Honourable East India Company's forces. Now, the interesting thing about these stall plates for companions of the Order of the Bath was that it was actually a little bit of a con, and historically they're very, very fascinating, because when the Order was expanded, essentially a circular went out to companions of the Order to say, aha, well, you are now entitled to your own stall plate, so please sign here on the dotted line, pay your £13, which obviously a fairly significant sum of money at that time. The government will have a stall plate engraved up and attractively coloured with a representation of your order, and it will be put up in Westminster Abbey for all to see, for your forebears and your ancestors to gaze upon, to say what a wonderful chap you've been. So lots of these fellows thought, oh, that's a fantastic idea, I will pay my fee and get it made up. So that's what happened. But unfortunately, it was then realised that there actually wasn't enough space in Westminster Abbey to put up all these stall plates that had been commissioned, especially for these lower levels of the Order. So if you were a Grand Cross of the Order or a Knight Commander or something like that, oh yes, you'd get your stall plate in there. But if you were a lowly companion, no chance. So unfortunately, pretty much all these stall plates lay in storage in Westminster Abbey for generations. And in the 1840s, a chap called Sir Nicholas Harris Nicholas, a very good name that, was writing to various people, the Central Chancery of Orders and Knighthood, the College of Arms, to say, what are we doing about these things? Because people are complaining that they've never seen the fruits of their labours and the evidence that they've given quite a lot of money to us. And indeed, nothing ever happened. They lay in storage until so legend has it, the 1970s, when they were discovered in box upon box upon box in a storeroom in the Abbey, when an enterprising restoration expert decided to buy all these out direct from the Abbey, who didn't want them, and to consequently sell them off to medal and militaria collectors. And that's how, over time, these have made their way onto the market. They're fascinating things, and I love them because a lot of them are rewarding Napoleonic era soldiers and officers and people who did some quite interesting things. And if you can't afford to buy the medal groups to these people, then you can potentially afford to buy the stall plate, which I think tells just as good a story about someone's military career as the medals themselves. Now, these comprise lot 266 and lot 267. They carry estimates of 5 to 600 and 4 to 500 pounds respectively. The one a little bit more because the Royal Artillery officer was very active in the Peninsular War, was also entitled to a Gold Cross, which is quite interesting. So if you have this chap's Gold Cross, Robert Douglas's Gold Cross, out there somewhere, it would be wonderful to reunite the stall plate with the medals. Likewise with George Mason, in the employ of the East India Company Army, took part in lots of interesting battles and sieges in the slightly post-Napoleonic era, 1817, 1820s, all that sort of thing. Again, lots of fantastic stories there involving battles with the Mahrattas in Mysore and all that sort of stuff. So again, I think you can get your money's worth and more for very little outlay. Again, all fully illustrated in the catalogue. Great stories to go with these. I said lots 266 and 267. And again, I hope they should do jolly well, because we don't often have these here. And I'm hoping that they will find really good new homes. So that covers my offering here for you today. It has been exclusively Napoleonic, as you might expect for someone such as myself with a passion for the Napoleonic Wars. I hope you've enjoyed what I've had to talk about here. And obviously, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to send me an email or pick up the phone, give me a call before next week's sale, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions you might have. As I said, we have a fantastic catalogue. It's a really, really good thing, lovely to see, and should do jolly well. The sale, of course, is on the 29th of July, and you will see Marcus and myself on the rostrum on the day. It is only a one-day sale this time, because we've got it quite nicely pared down to just over 500 lots, having had a very successful e-auction previously. So we've got it down to just over 500 lots, only one day required, and I think this is going to be Harry's debut on the rostrum as well. So please do tune in. You should hopefully all know and remember how to do so via our website. You can just watch if you want to, you can bid as well, and we'll be very, very pleased to see you all watching along and hopefully placing some bids. Without further ado, I will say thank you very much indeed for watching, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed all that Marcus, Harry and myself have had to talk about, and we look forward to auction day and another very successful sale. Thank you.